Welcome to Home and Away, the Tuesday episode on the No Ceilings podcast feed. I am your host this week, Tyler Metcalf. I'm very excited for this episode as I'm joined by the host of the Tag the Roll podcast, the host of They've Got Now, a regular guest on the Game Theory podcast and the Athletics Daily Ding. He also writes for Indie Cornrows and Uprocks. He is the one and only Mark Schindler. Mark, how's it going?
I'm good, Tyler. I appreciate you having me on, man. It's a very whirlwind December so far. Somehow it feels like we're both further into December and not in December at all. So it's been a fun couple of weeks, man. How's everything on your end?
Yeah, no, it's that fun time of the year where it's equally flying by and freezing at the same time. So,
Exactly.
yeah, just getting in the holiday swing of things. Put up lights outside for the first time this year.
Nice.
This week,
Congrats.
when the wife and I went and got a Christmas tree today. So, our first Christmas in a house. It's coming together.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Congrats.
How about you? Do you guys do anything for the holidays or traditions or anything you're really looking forward to?
Honestly, not anything like too crazy. Like my parents, I'm still back with my parents now because I just graduated 2 years ago. Um, and I'm moving out in spring. But yeah, like
Nice.
I have been very not super helpful in getting stuff up. I helped bring out the tree and get decorations brought up to the main floor of the house. But outside that, I've been I mean I did so I've gotten Christmas shopping done early this year, for
Oh,
me at least. I
that's
have
much better
gifts
than I
coming
can
in
say.
before the week of Christmas. I am a bad person. I'm a Christmas Eve shopper typically. So yeah, we're at least one step ahead in that regard this year.
There we go. It's just baby steps, incremental
Exactly.
growth.
Right.
Um, so I was really excited to have you on. And obviously,
Appreciate
since
that.
you're the guest, I wanted to talk about some prospects that you were excited about. So you pitched to me Jett Howard, which active listeners will know I'm a massive fan of. Julian Phillips, who I was really excited about because I really like his game, but I'm also really confused by it. We'll obviously get into more of it later. And then Jarace Howard, who I proposed to you and you eagerly accepted. So I think these are three really fun prospects for this draft. So of those three, where would you want to start out?
Let's start with Jet because I think Jet
Perfect.
is, especially after that Minnesota game. I was talking to my buddy Zach Milner, who I run Tag the Roll with, because he was like, "No, you got to watch the Minnesota game." Because like I already was really high on Jet. Like coming into the year, he
Mhm.
wasn't really on any boards, and I thought like pretty firmly that he was a first round prospect coming into the year just based off what he was doing at IMG. And I think that's played out easily. But then, like I was saying, in the Minnesota game, he's started finding like a level of comfortability on the ball that looks like even more so than I think I had felt. Like he already, like I think it's fair to say that he's Michigan's best passer and has been since the start of the season. But now, like the things that he's starting to show, just in terms of putting together the ball handling, playmaking, and driving ability, it's pretty exciting, especially with what he did in that Minnesota game.
Yeah, I mean, he's been, I think, one of the biggest early season risers for
For sure.
consensus boards. Like you, I had a really high grade on him coming into the year. I had him like top 15, and I didn't really understand why most people kind of had him second round at best.
Same.
So what do you think the reasoning behind that was, just with him coming out of IMG? Because there was a ton of talent on that team, and they were an awesome and really fun team to watch. And then what kind of made you deviate away from those consensus boards that had him later in the draft? And what did you see coming out of IMG that you were like, this dude's a first rounder?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think my assumption, I'd have to talk to people and gauge
Sure.
why they didn't see it with him, but my assumption is more just, I mean, he was viewed as like the fourth best prospect on that team this last year when he was a senior, which is wild to think about. But I mean, Keontae George, Jarace Walker, Jaden Bradley, like that's a damn good
Yeah.
team, and their talent behind them isn't awesome. They were not very, very deep last year, but then I mean, even then, you go up the year before, like okay, Musa Diabate is on that team. Like they've had a lot of talent the last couple of years. So I'd imagine that plays part of it. But like, I mean, like you're saying too, it's also like, well, I think that arguably you'd have your eyes on him more. So you'd think like, okay, well,
Right.
shouldn't there be more projection here? But for me, like, I don't know, just in watching him, I was like, okay, this dude is a pretty easy 6'7", maybe taller. He's got size, like he's not wiry, like he's coming in at 225, 230, and he plays like it too. And then it's just the actual like functional handle at his size with real playmaking ability. Like, no, he wasn't doing like primary reads and stuff like that. But in terms of, being a secondary shot making wing, who granted, like his shot has looked better this year than I expected. Like I thought he was going to be a good shooter, and he's been one of the best shooters in college basketball to start the year, which I'm interested to see if that, falls off a little bit. But granted, like even if percentages dip, like what he's doing variety wise and difficulty wise, it's been really impressive. But I think, again, like it's gone from me thinking, okay, this could be a really interesting starting like secondary wing in the league someday, to maybe there's like some untapped star side with him with what we started to see the last week or so, which is like, I mean, again, like that's mesmerizing. I think what's interesting too, like much about like kind of the same way we talk about Brandon Miller, which the discussion on Brandon Miller has been not fun recently, but
it's been something.
Yeah, it's a lot of lacking in nuance. But like with Jett right now, like I think the idea is that he can become a 3-level scorer. He's not there yet. Like I think that, again, like getting to the rim, he has no problem with, but he is a pretty below the rim finisher for his size. So I think there's always going to be some inherent flaws there. But then again, like it's okay, well, the floater's already pretty reliable from him. Obviously, I mean, we talked about the shooting and what that brings. And again, it's just like the actual ability to generate paint touches off of ball screens has been very real. So that's without mentioning the defensive side of the ball, which, that is definitely there are concerns there. But I think, again, it's with how much the offense has popped and continuing to show progress. I mean, Jett's one of the most exciting players in the class.
Yeah, so let's stick with the offense, the fun part for now.
Yeah,
We'll get to the defense in a minute. At the start of the year, I wrote a piece just breaking down his off-ball movement and how he leverages that to create basically scoring opportunities for himself in all areas of the floor, but then also for everyone else on the team, like you mentioned with his passing earlier. And Michigan will run like the same 3 or 4 plays for him just constantly over and over again, but there are like 8 different options out of that for him to just basically make whatever decision he sees. And I just thought that was exceptionally rare for just a pure freshman. Obviously, he's the coach's kid, so there might be an extra level of trust there with him and recognition of what he's capable of. So yeah, obviously he benefits from that, but it's still really rare that you just let this freshman run a play and then just go through his progressions and take whatever the defense gives him. The thing with that, though, is that it's like, okay, well, this is an awesome off-ball player and creator and scorer, and there's just an inherent ceiling that comes with that in the NBA. But then, like you mentioned with that Minnesota game, it's like, oh, he's starting to show a little more creation and comfort with the handle. And when he's coming off of these pin downs, they're blitzing him a little more and forcing him to pull it out and reset. And then he started attacking the mid-range and hitting these turnarounds. Do you think there's a lot more of that kind of self-ISO creation to his game? Or do you think that he's probably going to be best fit as that kind of off-ball secondary, tertiary creator?
I still think he's best fit as like a secondary, tertiary guy. But again, it's like, it's those flashes of more that are going to get him drafted higher if they keep up. Like that turnaround he hit was awesome. And I think it's less about the turnaround for me, more I ended up clipping this today, but they ran, it was like an action going away. I think he came off of an Iverson into a handoff, going towards an empty corner, but then they tried to trap him in the corner and he ended up, like you mentioned, like pulling the ball back out. But then it was awesome because instead of trying to dribble through it, he knew he couldn't. So he just automatically flipped the ball to Hunter Dickinson, ran around the screen again, got the ball back, and he ends up missing the floater. But it's like those like quick actions at his size with how well he can move around screens at time, is like, that's really hard for people to guard, especially like, again, like you mentioned, the broken play stuff has been really fun from him. And what's so weird with him too is just like trying to figure out who he is as an athlete, because I think he at times got billed as a bad athlete. I wouldn't go there. I think he's a funky athlete. Like I talked about this with Sam probably 2 weeks ago, but like he doesn't really have a lot of bend in like he has like so he can get like parallel with the ground. Like he has a lot of bend and flexibility in his legs and his upper body too, but his hips are really stiff. So like he can do really good stuff in terms of like going like north south and doing like just being shifty with his dribble. But when like you mentioned in the paths he takes off screens, when he has to come off like a really like a rangy screen, like if he's coming off of like out of the corner and you're trying to get him going towards the middle, like that takes work because it's like we saw with AJ Griffin last year where his paths are just so wide because I think part of it might be footwork, but also just in general, his hips are pretty stiff. And that plays out on defense too. But again, like it's well, when he does get the ball and he does make those little like 45 cut dimes, it's like, okay, well, there's not a lot of guys who can comfortably and fluidly drive with the ball in their hands while doing that. And so, you're throwing your name in the hat with a pretty dynamic group of players when you're able to do things like that.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you were really impressed by his passing. What about it really stood out to you? Was it just the variety, the accuracy, the vision, the processing, all of the above?
I think it's all of the above. Like he has quite a few passes in the bag. Like they don't really have a lob threat, but he's capable of lobbing it. Like he's thrown quite a few lobs. The post entry passing is really good from him. He just puts really good touch on the ball in general, which I think is huge. And I think it's the quickness and delivery too. Like he sees it while he's making it almost, it feels like. Or like, I mean, he sees it before, obviously, but there's not delayed reactions. Like if he is coming down middle and as soon as the tagger is in trouble with where the pass is going, he's throwing it. And I think like that's, again, it's just the quickness with which he does it. It's the accuracy. I've never, like, there hasn't really been a pass that I've seen from him where I'm like, that was a terrible pass. Like, I think you can always feel like right idea. I actually think he could get more risky with passes at times, which I think that's something that I mean, maybe if he gets more on ball stuff, we start to see that, which could be fun, especially too, because like now I feel like we're getting a lot more of him just getting to run some middle pick and roll instead of, him coming off of, coming out of the corner, because especially with how Minnesota was playing, it felt like they were like, okay, well, we're just going to get you the ball in the middle of the floor now to try and make it harder for them to trap you on, on the sideline. And that's where you start seeing, okay, well, you can't give him an under. And if you do, well, he's good enough to put you on his hip and get downhill. And yeah, I mean, when you talk about the kinds of reads that he has available to him and how he sees the court, it makes it really impressive. Because like again, like you mentioned, like he's good at pulling out, but then also like, okay, he can throw an overhand, or I want to see more in terms of what he can do hitting the roller, but like throwing stuff cross body, he doesn't have to have, two hands on the ball to make a really good read. So yeah, it feels like, especially for what has been asked of him so far, that I don't have any faults with his playmaking.
So going forward, it does really feel like he's starting to get more and more, or a longer and longer leash with what he's kind of being allowed to do, where it's not just exclusively off ball movement and stuff like that, where we are getting a little more primary initiation from him, because he's earning it. And he's really the only go-to perimeter scorer on that team. Kobe Buffkin has had a nice little renaissance here, and I'm excited about it. But
love Kobe Buffkin.
Oh my God, he's so much fun. But I wouldn't exactly call him a reliable scorer. And then Hunter Dickinson is Hunter Dickinson. So as the year kind of progresses, what would be like on your wish list to see from Jett going forward in terms of on ball create? Is it more of that kind of tough mid-range creation shot ability where he's showing off his footwork and his balance and ability to hit those tough shots? Is it a little more just consistent pick and roll, trying to find those skip passes to corner shooters who aren't necessarily on the team but are in those spots?
Yeah, I think for me, it would be more about seeing how he handles ball pressure, like we just saw in that Minnesota game. Because like if he handles it like that throughout, which granted, this Minnesota team is not awesome. I think like they did some good things, but they're going to be near the bottom of the Big Ten this year, most likely. So how does he look against a team that applies a lot of pressure like Michigan State, that will play the big closer to the level? Like I want to see, what does that look like? But I think the bigger thing for me is generating more paint touches, getting deeper looks, finding more ways to finish around the rim. Like, I think he's a guy who would be really interesting for me. Like, former Michigan guy, Franz Wagner, can he do some of the drive into a post up and then drive again? Like, getting stuff like that. Like, I think especially when you're looking at somebody who's more strength based when they're that big, that's where you like when they're inherent. And not that Franz had issues finishing at the rim. Obviously, he was like a little bit more contact averse, but partially because he just has that good a touch. But I think with Jett, he's going to have to be pretty crafty to become a better rim finisher. I feel like, especially like you mentioned with the footwork and finding some more go-to counters in the paint. So I think those are the things I'm looking for. I'm not really like, I think obviously the mid-range stuff is exciting, but I think like it feels like it's in his bag just based on what he has already and what he showed at IMG. Like, maybe they give him some, like, let him isolate and face up from, like, find crafty ways to face him up and get him out of post ups on weaker defenders or on bigger defenders. Like, find ways to be inventive and get a cross match on him and allow him opportunities to, okay, I have, I'm in the far corner. I have a 5 on me and I have the baseline to my left and I have a little bit of wiggle room in space. Like, can you get him in some of those opportunities to see what he can draw? And that kind of stuff I'd really like to see. But granted, just based on what their roster is right now, I think it's probably gonna be harder to make some of that stuff happen. And how much they kind of need to play through Hunter. But yeah, I think Michigan's just one of the more fascinating teams in general, even outside Jett, to watch the remainder of this year.
They're definitely a funky Michigan team, especially compared to their recent teams. So just last thing on his offense, do you have any concerns with his offense? One that kind of stands out for me is you kind of mentioned it earlier. He's not a bad athlete, but he's not a great athlete. Just the raw explosiveness isn't necessarily there. And he kind of struggles to really pressure the rim unless it's coming off of, those pin downs or off ball movement and stuff like that. Is there any part of his game or his offensive game or specifically that really worries you?
I don't think I'd say that there's anything that worries me yet. But I mean, like you mentioned, I think maybe it's just because I'm inherently lower on the idea of him being a primary. So at least like coming into the year, I just never viewed that as a possibility. So I think it's more that's just opened my eyes to it now and how he's starting to find things. No, I don't think that I have any massive issues with it right now.
All right, perfect. Well, an area that brings up a few more concerns is the defense.
Yeah.
Where are you at with that side of the ball?
I think that it's not, I mean, obviously very not good right now, but I also think that there has been a little too much hemming and hawing for what it means grand scheme. Like, for me, I look at him like, obviously the hips are going to be a problem. I think like, if he gets, like, the screen navigation is not good right now. I think part of that's technique, but he also just doesn't have very good defensive feel right now, in my opinion. As good as his feel is on the offensive end, he kind of always feels a little bit behind on plays on defense. So I think like that's stuff that could maybe just come with more time. I don't think it's that he's not trying hard. I think it's just generally needs more reps. The bigger thing that I want to see is, like, can he improve his closeout technique? Because I think right now his closeout technique is really bad. Like, he's awful at, he's not good at funneling somebody one way or the other. Like, he'll close out with his right hand, but his feet going to the left. So like he's giving up baseline, like things like that, I think, not that it's necessarily an easy fix, but I think if he really is like bought into becoming a better defender, I think that that's possible. I don't think that he's ever going to be like a great defender, just given some of his inherent physical abilities right now. But I mean, like, he has shown some good stuff just in terms of hand-eye coordination. Like, he's not like, I think he had like almost half of his blocks in one game, so take it with a grain of salt. But I do think he's shown some solid recovery abilities just using his length. But also that's because he's getting blown by. So it's not like he's actually rotating over and blocking a shot at the rim. It's no, somebody got across me because they cut and I didn't see them moving, and then I was able to block them because I'm a better athlete and I'm a bigger player. So I think that kind of stuff, it makes me feel like if he can really rein in some things, that he can get better and become at least, a quality team defender. And I think again, it's going to be more so like, how can he get better at handling screening actions? Because I think like as long as he doesn't have like a guard on him, he should be fine holding up on ball against bigger players. But again, a lot of it's technique because he does have kind of a high base right now. So I am interested to see how that plays out. But I think it's obviously not awesome, but it could be a lot worse than what it is in terms of what it actually means long term. Like he has been an actively harmful defender for Michigan right now. But I think just in terms of like long term projection, I'm not as worried about him being just a massive negative on court.
That's incredibly reassuring to hear. Because he's one of these guys, you see the offensive stuff and you're like, oh my god,
Yeah.
how is he not a top 10 guy? And then you watch him get back cut like 4 possessions in a row. It's like, come
Yeah.
on, dude. Like
And
you're
it
doing
is
this
like,
exact same thing on the
yeah.
other end. Like it's Kendall Brown all over again from last season.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I mean, it's what helps too. Or it doesn't help, but at least like, I mean, who is playing good defense for Michigan right now?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that, it's the whole team has been like their defense has just been a mess, which has been unfortunate, but also like again, like that's one of the things that I really want to see play out over the remainder of the year. Like, can they improve with that? Because they need to.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, it does make you think like, okay, if he's playing with a better defensive group that can look better, if he's like a little bit more focused, a little bit more engaged, if a strength team can get more out of his hips, flexibility wise. But yeah, like it's again, like the long term prognosis isn't awesome, but it's also not like the worst thing of all time, at least for me.
Yeah, and for me, I really feel like his landing spot is going to be a huge influence on it. Where
Yeah.
if he has this coaching staff and like veterans who are actively contributing on the floor, and they make it a priority of like, hey, you have to do this, or you're not playing, or are these bad habits just going to be exacerbated and just kind of fed into? I think that's going to be one of the really more fascinating things because I just, in a similar vein to what you were saying, I struggle to see him being awful like his entire career just because offensively he has such a high level of recognition and processing and floor awareness that's like, okay, some of this has to translate to the defensive end at some point.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like I tend to view that the same way as well, especially because like I just tend to think that he's gonna have a smaller role. So I think that, especially like if he was coming in as a primary, then yeah, I'd probably be a lot more suspect about the defense and what that could look like. But just given like even with it's not the same, but with AJG, like his defense hasn't been amazing for Atlanta, but I think he's had a segmented role. The defense as a whole has been better because, like, again, same thing. Like Duke's defense was a mess last year.
Yes, it was.
So I mean that just compounded a lot of the same issues. Like, yeah, AJ is still getting back cut a ton, but he's looked a little bit more spry defending on the ball. His hands have been really good. And you just see like general positives that weren't always there for him last year. So I think that maybe you can hope for some of the same stuff with Jett as well.
Alrighty, perfect. Next up, which one gets you more excited, Jarace Walker or Julian Phillips?
Jarace Walker, probably. And not that I dislike Julian, but yeah, Jarace is probably the guy to talk about next. Jarace, he has had a very funky start for Houston. I don't want to call it outright like a bad start. I think it has been an underwhelming start based on what expectations were. Like for me, I had Jarace as like the sixth guy in the class headed into this year
because like top 5.
Just for like just for background. So like the very first time I watched Jarace Walker was, I think it was either his sophomore or junior year when Montverde and IMG played. And that's game. It's Jalen Duren, Caleb Houston, Langston Love, like that Montverde team. Like the Reeks on that team as a junior, like that team is stacked, absolutely loaded. IMG was solid too, and obviously Jarace is on that team. And that's the first time I ever saw him. Like I don't see it. I was just like, I did not see it at all. He didn't have an awesome game. Like I got the idea. I was like, okay, he's extremely big, incredibly athletic, and there are some ball skills. And I was like, that's kind of all I see right now. Like I don't see touch. I don't see like, what is there a shot? Does he see the court well? And then last year he made this absolutely monster leap in terms of his feel for the game, his overall skill development. Like he went from somebody who looked like a non-shooter to like, he was taking a very real amount of shots. He was taking pull-ups. Like he had a bit of a post game in between game. And the passing was just so much better. Like
Yeah.
you could see so much more in terms of how he was seeing the court. And that's while also really budding as just a pretty monster defender. What's been rough, and I think to me, I didn't get to watch the St. Mary's game yet, but in watching yesterday's game against Alabama, um, before we even talk about the offense, like I do, well, offense at large, I think that he's starting to see the court a little bit better. At least in that Alabama game, I felt he did, but that's also low bar because there were points like the Oregon game, he just looked lost. Like early, like it's mostly been him spotting up in the corner and trying to cut baseline, and he hasn't really felt good in terms of finding ways to assert himself within the offense. Um, he hasn't gotten a lot of role opportunities, but also like Houston is arguably the best team in the country. They're not really in this to develop Jarace Walker. So like he has to find ways to pick his spots and become available. I think that they did a better job of integrating him and playing him more yesterday in a way that made sense. Like he got a few role opportunities. He got some opportunities to, like just face up and drive that I think were good for him. But he still feels like a little bit of a step slow. At the same point, though, he did make much better, like in terms of what his playmaking and decision making was yesterday. I think it felt better, but the most indicative. Of course, I say we'll talk about his offense in a minute. I like launch into it, but like he had a play where he caught the ball in the second half, close side of the court to the camera, and I think he could have gone up with it. And that's one of the biggest gripes of him right now is what his finishing has been, but. He jumps and it's an immediate jump pass. Like he makes the read extremely quick to the far corner, but it ends up being a charge because somebody, sets position right in front of him, right before right as he's jumping. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, I get the idea of what you're doing. I think that overall, like the execution was good, minus the, getting a charge, but it's more of the, okay, I need you to finish hard at the basket. Like that's been the biggest thing with him. He's looked good on the floaters. Like the floater hasn't been bad. Like he's been pretty solid on touch shots, but it's also like, okay, dude, you're 6'8", like 250 pounds, and you run like a 4.5 40, and you can jump over a Mack truck. You got to go up strong with it. And I think that's been the biggest confusing area for me is why he's doing that. Maybe it's like a concrete, I want to work on this type thing. It doesn't really feel like that in watching. It just kind of feels like that's been his go-to, and it's been weird to watch because I think he's leaving a lot on the table by doing that as a finisher.
Yeah, as someone who had him like fourth coming into the season, it has been like you said, it's not bad. I don't think he's been bad by any means, but it hasn't been the awesome level that I was expecting that we saw at IMG. And I think so much of that is that so frequently he looks like he's just like walking on eggshells, like trying not to upset his coaching staff because he is this freshman coming in to a more senior team with national title expectations. And Kelvin Sampson, I mean, in that Alabama game, he pulled Jarace Walker for like the final 7 minutes after he fouled Brandon Miller when Miller kicked out on that three-pointer. So it's been rough because he's not been allowed to do all of the awesome, wild, crazy, absurd things that he did at IMG, where he was being that point of attack defender and switching everything at the top of the arc and running point and running in transition and just being this super creative and versatile player. Instead, he's kind of getting the Dylan Mitchell treatment at Texas, where it's like, hey, go stand in the corner, set a screen now and then, and offensive rebound, and then go play awesome defense. So I am still really, really optimistic about his offensive bag, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And I think it's just that he hasn't really been allowed to show it. That St. Mary's game that you mentioned, he was bad. He sucked in that game, but he got in foul trouble early, couldn't really get in a rhythm. I thought he was really good in this Alabama game where he was showing a little bit more. I thought his defense was exceptional, especially off ball as that low man. There was one play where he was in the weak side corner. They set a high pick and roll. He not only tags the roller, but gets rim side to keep him out of the restricted area, then recovers to his man to intercept the skip pass and then takes it and gets fouled at the other rim. It's like, perfect. Love that. That's incredible. And then, a couple possessions later, he has this DHO keeper where he, keeps it, a Clowney jumps the Sasser who's coming over. He keeps it, drives, dumps it off. and they get an easy dunk. It's like, okay, this is the stuff that Houston really should be leveraging and utilizing more. So I'm hoping that Kelvin Sampson lets out the leash a little bit, lets him do a little bit more creative stuff, and doesn't punish him every time he makes a mistake, because that has kind of seeed to be the common theme there.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's funny too, because even yesterday, like Terrence Arsenault had an extremely short leash. Like there was it was Terrence like got one stint in the first half, had a turnover, got yanked, and also just to be like, I'm not on Kelvin about this. Like they're trying to win a national title this year.
Right.
But then it was like in the second half, okay, Terrence is in the far corner, and you can see Kelvin like automatically calling for Terrence, like yelling Terrence's name to come over and exchange corners, walks all the way down, still screaming his name. This is like a 15-second ordeal. And then as soon as the possession's over, Terrence is done for the game. Like, because he'd never heard him. And like, so, Kelvin's like, no, we gotta get you out of there. But yeah, I agree. Like, I think what at least was encouraging is that we saw more of the flashes of like, okay, here's what we can do with him in the offense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as much as I would like, it's one of those things where it's almost, what is the right option? Like I do wonder if, and not that I think GG Jackson is like developing poorly or something like that, but it's like, okay, if Jarace Walker goes to like South Carolina or somewhere that is going to give him 32-33% usage, how does that go? Does he develop bad habits? What does that look like? Is it too much? Especially with what he looked like at the beginning of the year. It's like, okay, well, does he struggle with his feel because of being in a smaller role, or is it just because he's getting acclimated to the college level? And then that really makes you think, okay, well, then how would that go if he was in that spot? So it's one of those things developmentally that always kind of gives me fits in trying to think it out. But like you mentioned, I think like at least they can go back on tape and be like, okay, these things worked. Like they had an empty corner pick and roll, and it was more like, the corner was empty, but they ran it in the slot. And it was Jarace basically just giving a brush screen and then caught the ball and damn near killed Noah Clowney at the rim with the missed dunk. And it's like that kind of stuff where he doesn't have to think at all. Get him the ball one step and up. Like that's the stuff that I think they need to do more of all year. And part of what's difficult is like they haven't had any issue pressuring the rim because Sasser's so good. Tremont Mark is awesome. Like that team is just, Jamal Shed I was not ready for that dunk at the beginning of the game yesterday.
No,
he was
nearly
really damn good yesterday too.
He was awesome.
So like I think part of, again, like it's just weird because it almost feels like he doesn't make sense of the team at times on offense. But then, like you mentioned, the defense. Like the defense to me, I think what really helps is that the defense is legitimately like game-changing stuff. Like I think he's going to be if he at least gets enough minutes offensively, like he can be a game-changing defender. Like he had part of it is like obviously Brandon is a very below the rim finisher right now, but he had that block as a primary rim protector, just absolutely sending Brandon's shit back. He was really good switching out. He was capable of hedging and trapping yesterday. There were multiple times when Alabama is kind of switch hunting and they did everything they could to get off of Jarace because he would get switched on. And they're like, no, we don't want you on me. So that was fun to watch. Like you mentioned, the just tagging in general, he's been really good. Like there are, I can't remember who said this to me, but it made me think too, like there are a lot of guys who will just like, they'll tag, but without like actually fully tagging.
It's like they're actually playing like a
Jarace like two-hand tags every time. And I love that because like you mentioned too, like how many guys in the country could actually make that, okay, I'm doing a two-hand aggressive tag and then I'm stealing the ball and shooting the gap. Like that play yesterday was awesome. So I think you can see all the things, as much as there have been difficulties on the offensive side of the ball. I don't really have any questions about the defense right now. Like I do think that they're obviously going to be like, how good can he become as a primary rim protector? Like, can you really get away with playing him at the 5 that much? What is his quote unquote ideal position? Because I do think that plays into how important his offense is, but I think I've kind of viewed him more in the mold of becoming a 4-5, like somebody who obviously he's not Bam. So I don't love doing the comp, but like having somebody who can handle a little bit, who has some ability and fluidity to get downhill, who has the playmaking feel and flashes to do some high post stuff maybe. And it just depends on skill development from there. And from what I've heard, because like I know a couple people who work with the Houston program, they've said that he is just like a crazy hard worker. And I mean, based on what he did the last 2 years, I believe that. So again, like it's been the first like 6 games were really discouraging to a point, but these last couple, I think there's been real reason to be optimistic about how he's starting to look.
Yeah, well, first off, you're in a very safe space when it comes to comps. I hate them, but I understand the necessary evil of them. So
Yeah,
it's always shades of pieces of type of role,
for
not
sure.
necessarily a one for one. So no worries, you're good.
Appreciate that.
The defense, what do you think his ceiling could be? Do you want him being that low man, just kind of being that free safety back there who is making all of these off ball reads and being really disruptive? Kind of in a similar vein to very obviously different roles, but something similar that we saw like Tyrese Halliburton do at Iowa State or Devin Vassell do at Florida State, where they're almost controlling that entire weak side by themselves? Or do you want him being that more disruptive point of attack, switching on the perimeter, kind of like he did at IMG?
I think that's what makes him fascinating, is that I feel like you can kind of do a little
So
bit of
just
both.
yes.
Yeah, like yeah, exactly. I think it's almost a blessing and a curse, because it's like the same stuff that we talk about with, again, like a Bam, because of like as good as incredibly switchy and good as Bam is, like Miami can get themselves in trouble sometimes because they're so comfortable with switching him out that they get themselves abused on the backside, because like, okay, well, Kyle Lowry is our low man, or Caleb Martin is defending a 5, and like they're going to fight, but also, as much as like it'll always come down to, well, like we're comfortable giving up any switch because we know our guys are going to compete 1-on-1. Like, yeah, sure, but also like it is an inherent disadvantage. Like, you can say that all you want, but I I watched what happened. Like that, it just doesn't work as well. So it depends on team construct, of course, but I think that's part of what makes him exciting, is like, okay, you can kind of do a ton of things with him that are all like, I don't really think I look at him as having a major flaw, other than like, I don't even think his screen navigation is bad. Like, you're also
Yeah.
not really asking him to navigate screens. But because I think he's ideally in a switch heavy defense. And I mean, we haven't seen him play drop at all, I don't think, at Houston. He really didn't at IMG either. So I think like it's going to be, how good can he get at doing some of the more technical things? But I mean, yeah, he's just a guy who I think the biggest thing is like that you can have a defender out there who the offense is saying like, we don't want him involved in our actions, but also we don't really want him off the ball, because then that allows him to roam and blow shit up. It gives him, it gives him a headache, gives him a quandary. And I think that's in itself, like, that's a win. So I think there's definitely a lot of room to figure out what he's going to be, but there's also a reason why that's exciting.
So last thing with his offense, what do you think his ideal role is? Do you think it is more of that kind of freedom to create his own in transition or on DHOs and just kind of out of isolation like he did at IMG? Or do you want to see that rein back a little bit and somewhere in the middle of basically where he is now, where it's nothing, or the bare minimum, and what it was then?
Yeah. I think it has to be a blend of the two. Like, I don't think that I view him as being a guy who's going to carry tons and tons of usage, but
Mhm.
also, like, I think if you're not working in the idea of him being somebody who can handle, who does have like the real ability to make open court plays, and um, just to be somebody who can make decisions. Like, I think if you're not growing him into somebody who can be a decision maker, then I think that you're underutilizing the pick almost. Because I think like that's what I really envision him being, is like a real like handoff hub, who can, again, like, it's going to depend on how the scoring continues to grow out. But yeah, I think like, again, like just making things difficult on opposing teams, because if having somebody who's 6'8", 250 that is running the floor with the ball can, like, that makes it difficult to defend in transition. Like, it makes you have to be way more careful getting back. You can't really just lay off of him if he's coming up, because he can get a full head of steam and just go to the rim. Like, I want to see a team really lean into what I think he can do.
Sorry, I lied. That isn't the last thing.
No, you're good.
So gotta ask about the shot.
For sure.
Because that was, the big question mark with him coming in, and I think it's still fair to have that be a question. I have confidence in it being fine, and I think that's all it really needs to be. I don't think he needs to be a lights out shooter or anything, but just as long as he's getting defenders to hesitate or second guess when he pump fakes, or
Yeah.
forces them to close out in some form or fashion. Because I think he has good touch. He tends to kind of lean back in his shot a little too much. I think he's cleaned a lot of that up since high school, but it still rears its ugly head every now and then. Where are you at with the shot as it is kind of now, and then projecting to the future?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's mainly like it's going to, like, I need to see him continue to get more up. Like I think that he has checked out of some this year, which has been like I think pretty routinely he's hesitated with stuff. Like he's gotten I think it feels like half of his turnovers are probably off of travels, and it's not because he
Hmm.
can't dribble. It's just like he gets caught in between doing things, which is again like that plays into the how he's been just feel wise. Um, I think the shot looks fine. Like it could be better. I think it looks really good as just a set shot right now, particularly out of the corners. Um, but like, okay, well, to get more out of him, can he, coming off of a ghost screen or a brush screen, can he, going to his right or left, get set enough and be comfortable in getting a shot off when a contest comes and make defenses have to worry? Because I think that's like the next stage for him. Not that I think that he needs to be a crazy movement shooter, but like, can he at least make, can you make defenses care a little bit more
Hmm.
is going to be important. But that still feels like a ways off. And that's probably going to be stuff we're talking about far into his pro career still.
All right. Well, let's then wrap up with Julian Phillips, who I loved coming out of high school. I thought that, hit that perimeter defensive pairing with Jordan Walsh in high school was an immense amount of fun.
That
Um,
Link team, they
they were,
play a really fun brand.
especially with Terrace Reed. That
Yes.
team
Oh,
was,
dude, I really want to see him get more minutes for Michigan. He's fun.
yeah. But Julian kind of got off to a slow start, and I was like, oh no, another Rick Barnes fiasco. We're,
Yeah.
we're, we're in for another one. But these last 5 to 8 games, he's really kind of started to pick things up. So where are you at with Julian?
He's somebody who it's funny because I did a early season thing at Cerebro before, obviously before the season started, on like, just looking out at like, we did like returning players, guys to watch out for, players who could rise that maybe aren't being viewed as one and dones that could be. And Julian was my guy who I was like, I think he ends up being like the big riser this year, that people weren't really anticipating. And I think he's done a lot of the things for why I think that. Like he is kind of vexing because I watched him at, like whenever I watch Link to watch Jordan Walsh and Taurus, like you see Julian, and it's like you see all the ideas of what he can be because
Hmm.
like he's shooting better on threes now. Like you mentioned over the last 5, I think he's shooting around like 36%, which compared to his regular, like the whole season, like a lot better because he started off pretty slow. But um he's never been like a great shooter, which is what makes it weird. Like he shot well inside the arc on like, and his form looks good. Like the shot overall like looks good, but it's also been a lot of flashes. But what's been fun is that it feels like he's at least found a couple things that he's really been able to root his game into. And then that just makes the base of what he brings all that much more exciting for teams, I feel like. And to me, like that's somebody I look at every single year. There's like 1 or 2 guys who are going to be talked about as being like a year away, but they have enough in the bag here and the production has been good enough where teams are going to be very interested in taking them. And Julian is very much that guy. Like um the foul drawing has been quite
Yes.
legit. And it's like, I think a lot of people looked at the USC game and they're like, oh, well, it's just because he was attacking out of the middle of the zone. But even then, like he's drawn close to 10 fouls in, I think, 5 of his games. Like it's been impressive stuff. Like the only game where he hasn't gotten the foul line was against Kansas. And that was, as much as that was a rough offensive game for him, I thought that was the best defensive showing from him. Like he completely took Grady Dick out of that game, which was I mean, that was a huge win from Tennessee. And they just won again today against the ranked Maryland team. So they'll be in top 5 tomorrow probably. But yeah, like the offense is like, again, it's more like off ball wing who has some flashes of handle. Like that's the biggest question for me. Like I think he shows driving ability, but he's not quite strong enough on the ball. The handle's not really that tight. But there are the flashes, and it's like, okay, well, when he does get there, that's really cool. Or like, this and that. And it's like, you factor in that he's young, that he hasn't really grown into his body fully yet. And again, it's like you envision that stuff out and you're like, okay, I see that. Like I get that. That's an extremely enticing player that teams are going to be bought into because they're always looking for scoring wings. And he has a solid feel for the game too. Like I don't think he's a great passer by any stretch, but he makes good decisions he makes decent decisions within the flow of the offense. I never feel like he's trying to dominate. Like I think that he's pretty good at asserting himself without also, overly taking things over. And he can make like some okay plays off the dribble too. So I think like that inherently, again, like when you're talking about a guy who's still figuring out their drive game, like that's a win. And then defensively, like he has really good hands. He's extremely long. I don't really know that I believe in a ton of rim protection from him. Like he can do some weak side stuff, but I don't think it's necessarily anything that is going to cause offenses to game plan differently. I feel like a lot of his blocks are just like, I'm bigger, faster, taller than competition. Like that's part of being a high RSCI guy. But like again, like I mentioned with the Kansas game, like the way that he played Grady Dick was really good stuff, especially considering he factored in a lot less offensively. And like I always, at least something I try and do more now, like when I see a player who gets kind of taken out of what their element is, okay, well, how do they insert their themselves on the game? How do they imprint themselves and make themselves a factor? And Julian did in that game. And that was huge. That was really huge to see. So I'm excited to keep following along with him because he definitely feels like somebody who is going to rise into the first round just based on what his play has been overall and him trending upwards right now, and Tennessee as a whole trending upwards. But SEC play is going to be really pivotal for him because that's going to be a lot of physicality and a lot of teams that are, going to have an entire, 2 months of scout on him from watching non-conference. So it's he's one of the guys over the next couple months that's going to be really fun to follow along with.
Yeah, and I think something that really stands out to me about his game is that you can just clearly see like how much he's thinking and processing the game on both ends of the floor, where everything he's doing away from the ball, it feels like really thoughtful. And I mean this in a good way, not that he's overthinking things or anything like that, but like when he cuts, sometimes he tends to like cut into a guy posting up or cut into a guy's driving lane, but the idea was there, and like he sets up his guy and like it's a good cut, just poor timing with it. The off-ball defense stuff, like he's really active on the weak side. A lot of that similar tagging and recovering that we talked about with Jarace, not quite as physical, obviously, because Jarace is a Minotaur and Julian is a normal-ish human being. And then he transfers that into just like really effortless on-ball defense. And I think the defense right now is really legitimate and basically showing up consistently on a nightly basis, which is incredibly encouraging for a pure freshman. And it's something we don't always see. So even though the offense, I think, is a little more raw, the fact that the defense is there and then the offense, there are these flashes, like you were saying, of, oh, okay, there is something to really build on here. And they're not like flashes of, oh, that was cool, we'll see that one more time in 3 months from now type of thing. It's like, oh, okay, that's a flash where there's a legitimate foundation that we can kind of keep building on. The shot, I really like the upper body mechanics. They're fluid, they're consistent. It's the lower body stuff that he has to figure out, the feet placement, the wide stance, the right foot is sometimes even or behind the left foot. It's like, oh, all right, you got to clean that up. But I would rather figure that out than, fixing elbow or release issues and a lack of fluidity up top. So I'm really excited about how he kind of continues to grow. I hope he keeps getting these early season opportunities because these last 3 games, he's gotten to the free throw line 10 times, 7 times, 8 times, 0 against Kansas, but then 12 against USC and 6 against Butler the game before that, and then 12 the game before that. So he's attacking the rim. He's being really active on the offensive glass. He's cutting. He's keeping it simple. It doesn't feel like he's really pressing or trying to do more than he's capable of or more than he should. Which he is a trap that he could easily fall into on that Tennessee team, and he's avoiding it. And I think it's really going to continue paying dividends for him.
Yeah, I like what you mentioned too, because even just like in thinking about it again with the free throws, like despite being a guy who is like 200 pounds soaking wet at 6'8" or 6'9", he doesn't play like it. Like he plays very physically on both ends of the ball, which I appreciate. Like it's obviously he's not Jaden McDaniels, but again, it's like that same idea, like not to that level because Jaden McDaniels is like crazy functional strength, but
Yeah,
I think same idea. And like you mentioned too with the shot, it's interesting because like I just think it's something we see a lot with wiry freshmen. Like Ryan Rollins had the same issue when he was a shooter his first year at Toledo. Like I think it cleaned up a lot last year as he got a little bit stronger and added some muscle on. I think it's going to be the same thing with Julian because you could see that at times with Link too. Like that you can see like it never felt like the upper body was bad, but the lower body is just like he's very clearly thin. Like it needs to figure that aspect out and get stronger. And I think that's going to happen because everything else like that in terms of just touch indicator and where it's at, I feel good about. But yeah, it's just the actually improving strength is going to be key for him.
So as we kind of project forward, obviously, draft is 6-7 months from now, so it's in eternity in basketball years.
Yeah. Ticking closer and closer, though. Yeah, it'll be here before we know it.
By the day, is this a guy that you think ends up kind of keeping his name in the draft and ends up being a one and done, or do you think he's going to be one of these guys who comes back and has a big sophomore year?
I think he goes this year. I could end up being fully wrong on that. I don't have the feeling that he's going to fall apart in SEC play. Yeah. Like, I think that he's done a lot of replicable things. He's really like, it hasn't just been random heaters. Like he's done stuff that's baked into Tennessee's offense. It hasn't just felt like I'm getting the ball here. Like, cause I think you could look at USC and be like, maybe that ends up just being a one-off game because they needed him to flash middle and be really effective for them. But again, like you look at, okay, well, he's been incredibly productive since then. It's not like it was just like, yes, that game inherently on its own is like a little bit murky. Like I think that some of the numbers are bigger than they really mean just because of like what the actual context was. But again, based on everything else, I think like you can pull together a pretty clean picture of what he is. And it seems to, based on more public boards and just in general, that he is, going to start getting some more of that traction. I don't think he's gotten any first. I would probably have him into the first now, probably more in like the back end of the 20s.
Yeah.
I need to do a public board sometime soon, but yeah, I think he's going to be climbing up into that relatively soon. Whenever we get like the next real drop of boards, I would imagine he's up there.
Love it. Yeah, I think he's one of those guys where end of the first, I'd just be like, yeah, there are a lot worse options to take a flyer on. Yeah. I'm just very excited. Like you said a couple times, SEC play, it's going to be so much fun this year.
Yeah.
But Mark, before we wrap up, I tend to end every episode by asking, what's the best thing in the basketball world you saw recently? You can go however deep or shallow you want in this. It can be from any walk of basketball life. It can be from the YMCA gym, something cool you saw your neighbor do in the driveway, something in the NBA. But what is the best thing in the basketball world that you saw recently?
Best thing I saw in the basketball world recently. It might not even be best thing, but it's just thing that I think made me think the most in terms of like how teams attack defenses. Maryland and Notre Dame played recently on the women's side, and I obviously like I cover the WNBA. I do stuff covering the draft over there too, and really exciting prospect this year named Diamond Miller, who's like a kind of like a big combo forward with guard skills, but she also can she can basically play every position. It's kind of wild. But Notre Dame was like switching all their forwards and trying to just muck things up so that she couldn't really get any separation. So then Maryland, the entire second half, just like ran her off elevator screens to make it harder for some of the switches. So they would like run her outside elevator screens to make it a lot harder to just part up the middle to just like part up the middle to make switches easier. I mean, basically they did it to make switches harder. My bad. I can't all over the place. And it was just super fun to watch because everything was with a purpose. It was always to like get her into space against a slower footed defender or a smaller defender because she's she's too strong for guards, and she's got too good of a handle to just put a guard on and take away her handle and get up into her. So yeah, basically like Maryland was doing it just made me really rethink the idea of how teams work to get matchups, how they work to take advantage of a defense. Because like I think obviously you typically like hear and think about switch hunting or the way that teams are taking advantage of things. And it was cool because like Maryland found ways to really take advantage of things that Notre Dame was inherently doing to not get matchup hunted, and took advantage of it. And it was just cool to see. It feels like I'm just like seeing more of how strategy actually plays out in game. So I really appreciated that. And also I encourage people to watch Diamond Miller play basketball because she is unreal. Like one of my favorite prospects I've ever watched. Super funky player. I have no idea what she's going to be, and that's part of why it's exciting. So yeah, basketball is pretty great, man.
It certainly is. Mark, thank you so much for your time. This was a blast. Please tell everyone where they can find you, where they can read and listen to you, and just however they can support you.
Well, I appreciate this. Thanks a ton for having me on, man. I know we'd like, kind of talked in parting at times, so I'm glad we could actually catch up in person. It's close to in person, but yeah, you can find me on Twitter at MG_Schindler. I should have a decent amount coming out this week. I'm flying out to California to go do a feature tomorrow, actually, or I guess today. Now that's Monday, but yeah, a lot on the horizon. It's going to be a busy week, but I'm looking forward to it.
Very exciting. Can't wait for that. I'm sure it will be incredible as always. But once again, I'm Tyler Metcalf. You can follow me on Twitter at TMetcalf11. You can find all of our written work at NoCeilingsNBA.com. It's 100% free. Just click that subscribe button to make sure that you never miss anything that we publish. You can follow us across all socials at NoCeilingsNBA and on YouTube at NoCeilingsTV. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and 5-star rating. Until next time, see ya.